Hey, everybody. I am coming to you today to kind of offer an overview of what we've been doing in the course. This has been one of the hardest semesters for me ever. I know a lot of you have also been struggling because, gosh, at least 30 or 40% of y'all, depending on the class, have gotten in touch with me about all the crazy things that are going on in your life. And I am here for you when you need a little extra. And if you just need an ear, I've gotten to talk to a few of you actually and get to know you a little better. I've been in and out of the ER last month, starting a little bit before my birthday. And it's just, a lot of gastrointestinal issues that I didn't even know I had. And they've just been really horrible. And then on top of that, I have had some issues with the bright space that we use at A&M, East Texas A&M. And I have now begun to work with the IT people to try to repair some of these problems that have been caused. So, what I wanted to do though today is to get in touch with you and let you know why I pivoted. Last week, I was going to be getting in touch with you about the time that I had to go to the ER again, and then spent, 2 or 3 days in bed, unable to do anything. Um, the reason that I've pivoted from doing some of the stuff that I had said I was going to do, including watching a few films, is because I just simply could not get access to through the library to the stuff that I wanted to work with and the things that they did have. I was like, even I think these things are boring, so I'm not going to just take it because that's all I have access to. I realize that almost everybody has access to Netflix or to Amazon or something, but even in those locations, and I couldn't take a chance that. And I literally had a class one time before where I was trying to just use, Netflix or Amazon, and like half the class didn't have Netflix or Amazon. It's just what it is. So what I decided to do was to kind of keep it in popular culture, but we're pivoting a little bit, right? So we did our first few weeks. We did some stuff that I had been working on and for a new book, and we did a little bit of Carl Jaspers, my mentor's teacher, the existential philosopher and existential psychiatrist Carl Jaspers. And then we jumped into the all of this ancient stuff, right? So basically, what I've what I decided is, okay, since I can't get us into full on contemporary pop culture stuff, I'm going to go ahead and have us move into a little bit of ancient Chinese philosophy called Taoism, which has some interesting parallels with a children's story that many people are familiar with and is very easy to access, and that is, of course, Winnie the Pooh. So, I mean, you can't get much more into popular culture than a children's story. Um, anyway, so what I wanted to do was to do this overview that kind of draws everything together now that I'm healthy enough to be able to put together a coherent sentence and then be working over the course of the next week. That would be between, see, what is it? Today's the 9th. So between now and the 15th to get the problems that I have with bright space cleared up so that y'all are getting everything that you're supposed to get from me. That's why I'm putting this actually up on YouTube, so I know for a fact that there won't be any glitches. I'll just send it to you as an email as well as put it into our stuff. So let me share my screen. And what I'm going to do in sharing the screen is just open up our actual Brightspace and go into D2L and just kind of go through what we have going on. And and show you that despite the fact that you might have gotten to a point of being like, I have no idea how any of this connects to anything, it actually all does connect together. You just needed your very sick professor to help you see a little better how those things connect. Okay, so let's do this now. Uh, I'm going to share. Let me get over here and share my Firefox. Okay, okay. So now, move that over there so it's not in the way. Just to kind of remind us a little bit here, we basically spend time looking way back to the period 700 BC to 350 BCE in ancient Greece. That's been the very bulk of our studies, right? Looking at what I would call the origins of Western civilization. Uh, I mean, there are other ways to say that the origins of Euro-American civilization, the origins of, in a sense, in one way, you can say one of the most fundamental roots of global civilization, insofar as we have turned into a global community. And uh, whoops, Daisy. And so when you go back and you look at that, you all have been seeing the parallels to some of these ideas that still exist today. You're also all of you seeing ways in which we have either gone a different direction after kind of jumping off from those points, or we have taken those ideas back up after not having them for a few, using them for 1,000 years, like the atomism that you just discovered, and kind of turning that into a basic scientific theory that we use on a regular basis. So basically, what we did in the first few weeks then was prep to go back to ancient Greece. And in prepping to go back to ancient Greece, obviously, the first thing we did was we looked at origins. We got started to do that by looking at ourselves, right? And when you are looking at yourself, you want to kind of I got you to kind of write up who you are, introduce who you are, talk about what you care about, come up with a question that actually drives you, that could drive you. Maybe you didn't have a question before, right? There's a lot going on in our country, and there's a lot going on around the world right now. And it's a very good idea to get a better sense of who you are and how you'll respond to others, and everything, right? So for me, this is very important. It doesn't matter what century you live in. It doesn't matter what place you live in. It doesn't matter, what political faction or what religious faction you belong to. Learning how to examine yourself will help you learn how to better be ready to examine the world around you and the situation you find yourself in. So you introduced yourselves to each other. And then you also talked about the things that you care about, something that really drives you. Quite a few of you were really worried about global climate change. Some others of you were worried about, certain kinds of medical issues. Others were, worried about physical medical issues. Some were worried about psychological medical issues. And it's great to see how everybody has a different thing for which they're concerned, but their concerns are not necessarily opposing concerns, right? And when you live in a democracy, or at least um, a representative republic with democratic elements, you have to learn how to see that everybody's different issues don't have to necessarily be in complete and utter competition, like it's a zero-sum game, right? So this was the reason to get y'all to share with each other, to see that you all care about something, that you all are attempting to learn and better express who you are, and to come up with a question that might be a guiding question for when you get out of this crazy class. I know that the course has been hard for a lot of people. And really a lot of the hard part came after we got out of these first couple of weeks, came from, working with the textbook and working with these ancient ideas, and some people believing, and again, many of the people who I've talked to from your classes are folks who got out in touch originally because they felt like they didn't get the material as well as other people. And my response to that, and I tried to put this in a few of my remarks, is everybody's going to get different layers and different notions from these things they read. That's the point, right? That's the point, is that we're all kind of coming at this from uh, a different origin, right? Because we all are born different places, we're all raised different places, we're all coming from different families, we're coming from different backgrounds. There's a lot of difference alongside all of the similarities, right? And so this is an ability then to kind of learn to listen to each other after you've learned to listen to yourself, right? Or at least as long, at the same time that you're learning to better listen to yourself, you're learning better to listen to others, right? And I will say this semester in this course, the number of really substantive responses in the discussions, meaning more than, oh, I really like how you said this, or I don't really necessarily understand how you said that, and I don't know if I agree. Not as deeply profound, but long, substantive responses that actually come with some questions for the person, even if yeah, you don't have a mandate to reply. So only a very few of you really ever got into a longer discussion. But the point is, your substantive replies, there's so many more substantive replies this year. I'm really proud of everybody in this course because of how open you've been and how much you've taken it on. And even when, like I said, about half of you have gotten in touch with me to tell me I'm not sure that I'm as, getting as much of this as some of my other people in the class are, you've stuck with it, and no one's embarrassed anybody and nobody's bullied anybody, and I can tell you that's a rare thing, and so I'm very proud of y'all for doing that because you really dug in from your origin point, right? So now that we're at the end of the semester and we're going to start these last sections on non-Western philosophy, Chinese Taoism, and Winnie the Pooh, then I want us to be returning to our original guiding questions, because a part of this purpose of getting us to see, you know, the differences that obtain alongside the similarities, and the similarities that outshine the differences, is now to kind of move into a different way of thinking about the world from a totally different civilizational origin, right? So your guiding question now should come back into all of this stuff we're doing with non-Western thinking, Chinese Taoism, and Winnie the Pooh. And as we will finish out the last couple of weeks of the course, The Wisdom of Insecurity by Alan Watts, who about half of y'all chose Alan Watts for a couple of your videos that you commented on. And so I think that everybody's going to get a lot out of this notion of the wisdom of insecurity. And so we come now then from our originating place to get to the source of our similarity, right? So if our origins are all different, and the places that we have come from and the experiences that we've had that are all different, is, where does that similarity of humanity actually find itself? It finds itself in the source, right? In the source that Jaspers calls the encompassing, that some people call God, that some people call Buddha consciousness, that some people call Krishna consciousness, some people call Tao. It's the source the common source of our humanity, right? That through which all of us connect, right? And I'm not trying to convert you into some new kind of religion here, okay? I'm just simply talking about how no matter how human beings originate in different situations, different locations, different times, we share in the source of being human, which itself arises out of the creative source, right? What Jaspers calls the comprehensive or the encompassing, right? And that creative source is full of so much energy and so much imaginative inspiration that it has since time immemorial it has been an impetus, right, to overcoming whatever the differences are and reaching across to each other, okay, to talk to each other, to share with each other, to try to understand, right? This is actually something that I can get across more easily when I'm in a regular face-to-face course where I'm teaching. That's because in face to face, I can actually sort of respond a little better in the moment to how people are reacting. And when you're just doing everything through letters and, in a sense, discussion posts are kind of like writing letters to each other, it does get a little more difficult because there's not, because everything is extended across a period of time, so you can't really respond in the moment, right? But the point I guess I'm trying to make here is that in a face-to-face class, I would regularly try to keep bringing us back to the notion that we are all very different because each of us singularly, right? Each of us is a singularity, but each of us is a singularity that arises from the same source, humanity, which itself arises from the same source, life, which itself arises from the same source, the encompassing reality, being, God, Buddha mind. What you choose? Okay, there's doubt. There's so many different ways to describe this originary source. I mean, heck, you could even say the encompassing force gives rise to the living force, gives rise to the human force, right? And that's what we share, right? That energy. Now, in examining the source to get to it, we have to understand the different ways the source shows itself, right? And you were given alongside the request to kind of keep in mind your guiding questions throughout the whole thing. And let me remind you, my guiding question is always, not always, but it has been for the longest time, how do we educate one another, right? And we uh I want you to kind of go back to that, keep all of that in mind as we go a little forward here in our work, and we look at these three paths, I suppose you might say, the three paths to the source: wonder, doubt, and thrownness, right? So we are often wondering at what's going on. We often wonder here, meaning we're sort of gobsmacked. We see something and it literally leaves us sort of, whoa, what was that? A marvel, right? Not oh gosh, I wonder who's at the door when the doorbell rings. Not that kind of wonder. That's a kind of way of talking about wonder. It diminishes what wonder is, right? Wonder is, oh, whoa, what is that? Right. And then you really have to think about it. And then maybe you get an idea. Maybe you have an experience of wonder at something. And then you think, oh, wow, I guess that's what that is. Let's say it's X. I guess that's the best way to go it, right? And then you go along for a little while and you're kind of working with this concept of X, but then you begin to realize that that doesn't fully get the concept. Something about it's not really jigging with your situation and what you're seeing in the world. So now doubt comes in, and doubtfulness is one of the ways to the source, right? Because doubt is the only way that you can question the things that you've held as true, but never actually never actually tested, right? And this, of course, was the reason why when we were going through introducing ourselves and then coming up with, where we were our what we care about and coming up with our guiding question and interacting with each other and getting to know each other. This is where we also began to say, what are the things that you've learned from people you deeply care about that you've never questioned, right? But you should. And when you do that, you realize there's lots of things around it that don't actually add up, right? Like a lot of Americans, I would say the overwhelming majority of Americans, including the people who immigrate here, believe in the idea of equality and they believe in the idea of freedom. But I had an old professor, Professor Ed Coombs at the University of North Texas, who once told me, "Don't you realize this?" Is because I'd never thought about it. Right? This is one of those things you go in the source pushes you back. Doubt pushes you into actually dealing with these things. Right? He said, Brown, don't you know that equality and freedom are mutually exclusive ideas? And I was like, what the heck? What? Equality and freedom are mutually exclusive ideas. And here's the deal. Are they? Honestly, I doubt his statement, right? I doubt his statement. But gosh, you know what? Because I doubt his statement, it caused me to doubt for a little bit how I understood equality and how I understood freedom, right? And I came to get that, wait a minute, yeah. Um a technical notion of equality that every single one of us is equal, right? Would not require the idea of freedom, right? If everybody was completely equal, everybody would do the same thing. We wouldn't have to actually worry about freedom, right? We just do the same thing. But then you go to the other side. If everybody is actually free, right? Isn't it the case that sooner or later there'd be a lot of inequality? Because as you freely choose to do the things you want to do, you may begin to develop in ways that bring you out of this whole equal thing. So I actually began to understand, wait a minute, okay, so they're not necessarily mutually exclusive ideas. They're competing notions until you can figure out how to, get them to come together. Yeah, and as complementary. They're competing until you can figure out how to get them to complement, right? So this is the reason why in many of our circles, people will say, no, 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 it's not a quality of being, right? Every human is obviously different, right? I already made the claim that every one of us is a singularity because there is no other human being in the world like you, although there are similar ones, right? Uh, but equality in this sense then would mean equality of opportunity is the way most people come to think of this idea of equality is that everybody has the same opportunity. This is the way it's usually put forward in our a lot of our political conversations and our financial conversations. Everybody kind of has the same equality of opportunity if you just really get out there and you seize the opportunities, right? And then freedom in this sense is the liberty. It kind of boils down to what I would call a kind of, if you will, an Abrahamic notion of free will in the sense of you have the freedom to exercise your abilities and seize your opportunities. You also have the freedom to ignore your abilities and lose your opportunities, right? And that's kind of one way that these things kind of play themselves out as concepts in our socio-political structure, right? Now, I am not claiming that we all have equality of opportunity, and I'm also not claiming that all of us have free will, right? I'm saying this doubt is the way that you come to actually see how the source, humanization, humanity, being human, uh, uh, gives rise to concepts and ideas that help us navigate our way and negotiate our way through life, right? And then we have this third way of getting to the source, right? From wonder to doubt to thrownness. That once you've kind of gotten past this position of doubt, you realize that a lot of the things that you believe can be doubted, that you believed were, that you believed were undoubtable, indubitable, are doubtable, and that kind of to grow up and move forward, you have to be able to doubt now, right? And now, if you have been able to get this wonder at that which you've never experienced, doubt about that which you've not questioned, now you're kind of opened up to the third possibility of the path to the source, and that's thrownness. And thrownness is where you'll get the most, what I would call, uh, existential opportunity to discover who you are while you're discovering how the world is, right? Because in thrownness, okay, that's where we actually suddenly realize the wonder of being thrown into a world, right, that we did not make, and our doubts about being thrown into a world without our choice to be thrown into it, right? So you have the thrownness goes back in a sense, not to be too punny, re-encompasses these other two. They're part of the steps forward: wonder, doubt, wonder, doubt, wonder, doubt, the experience of thrownness. I wonder at how I have been thrown into this world so vast, beyond my full comprehension, and I doubt, right, that I would have been asked to be thrown into this world, or I doubt what I've been told about being thrown into this world, right? And now when we kind of open up ourselves, and we now see that a lot of what we've been working with, and maybe you didn't realize it, all semester has been pushing to the boundary, pushing to the limit, right, of our experience, of our understanding, of our knowledge, of our training, in order to just think about this vast, infinite life, right? And that the human condition itself, the source that we all share, the human condition itself, right, is in a way is defined or confined or refined or put forward or visible as an actual thing, this human condition, by certain limits that we cannot actually get beyond, right? That is, everybody is going, everybody has to be born, but if you're born, you have to die. Everybody, right, is going to find that they have some kind of guilt as well as some kind of innocence. Everybody is going to find that they have some kind of suffering as well as some kind of joy. Everybody is going to find that they have some kind of struggle as well as some kind of ease. Everybody is going to find that they have gone through some experience of chance as well as some experience of purpose. Right. So these five limit situations that Jaspers talks about in his notions of thrownness, right? Death, birth, um, guilt, innocence, suffering, joy, struggle, ease, chance, purpose. These limits are places where when we find ourselves experiencing the world at one of those limits, it allows us to reconsider, right, what we understand about maybe some of the limits that have been put around us by human choice, right? So, look at what it is many laws, many moral habits, many ethical customs actually arise from people who first struggled, or first encountered and attempted to understand one of these limit situations that we can't get over, like death, right? If you are born, you will die. There's no getting over that. Okay. Uh, you can believe that there may be a life after death. You can believe that there may be some kind of reincarnation, but it doesn't take away the fact that, in terms of the life you're living right now, you were born and you will die, and maybe something happens after that. But we really are mostly concerned at the moment as philosophers with how we find ourselves in this situation. Well, when you look at most of our ethical customs and most of our moral habits and most of our laws and whatever, um, you see that they actually always go back. And so, they always connect back to one of these limit situations, attempt to understand, deal with, um put forward some comprehension of one of these limit situations. But our expressions of that, right? That would be the laws, the morals, the moral habits, the ethical customs. Our expressions of that are not the same as the limit situations. They may derive in some fashion as a response to one of these uh, ultimate situations that cannot be overcome, but they are themselves overcomable, right? What do I mean by that? I mean simply that, let's say we have a habit, right? We have a custom to eat with your elbows off the table, right? That's our custom. Now, a lot of people know that the reason that you're not supposed to put your elbows on the table, that's bad manners, is because a long time ago, it was the tabletops were actually just would be brought in as a plank and put on, something else. And it was real easy. If you put your elbows or your full weight onto the table, you flip the top off, right? Uh, Look, that is that is as a custom, is a response to a material condition that doesn't even really exist anymore, and was actually more of a response to the ultimate situation of chance. If you happen by chance to put your full weight onto a tabletop that's not well grounded, it's going to pop over, right? But if you test the tabletop and you know that it's built with all the legs on the side, like modern tables, that's generally not a problem, right? So while we can overcome chance, we can probably at some point get to a place where we're like not just saying, mindlessly, "Oh, don't put your elbows on the table. That's bad manners," right? When I'm in a symposium with other thinkers, with other philosophers, right? Symposium being, kind of a gathering around a table where we're drinking and eating and talking to each other about ideas. I often lean over onto that table. I've tested it, and they've got my full attention, right? They've got my full attention because manners are good for kind of helping keep us from accidentally insulting other people or accidentally by chance causing an issue, causing some kind of problem. But they're capable of being overcome. It's capable of saying that's nice, but that's not a necessity anymore, right? Thank you, Miss Manners, but that's not a necessity. Anyway, okay, so that maybe that's kind of a you think that's kind of a shallow example, but let's move on from this because I thought this was actually an area where I really wanted to just totally reinvigorate your memory about what we had done at the beginning of the semester. And now let's kind of just take a look then at where we came in. So we go from looking for from wonder, doubt, thrownness, where we begin to see our connection to the source of being human, which is connected to the source of being alive, which is connected to the source of all being, right? And here we go. We go all the way back to some of the mythical, poetic, uh, stories and songs and epics that were created around 800 BCE by people like Hesiod and Homer. And yes, I specifically have gone back to a part of time that is not uh, ancient Judea, Palestine, and Egypt. Okay. Uh, it is, and I have done that because I feel like as Americans, the overwhelming majority of people, even atheists, are well enough aware of all of those stories. And you have that as part of your thing. We don't really do a lot with these ideas anymore. Way less than when I was a kid. When I was a kid, it was common that in fourth, fifth, and sixth grade, you did a lot of work with Greek and Roman mythology, and then maybe a little Norse mythology. But I don't really see that much in students anymore. I don't that they're that interested in it or that they actually were put through it just to learn it, right? So we go back to this part. One of our origins in ancient Greece, the origins of our civilization, keeping in mind that the Abrahamic traditions that are still more active are Judaism, Christianity, Islam. Some people might put Baha'i in there, but I don't necessarily know about that. But definitely those three, right? Judaism, Christianity, Islam, that you're really aware of all those things. So we go back to these ancient myths, and these ancient myths basically we see wonder, doubt, thrownness constantly being intertwined with each other, right? We wonder at life. We doubt the fact that, remember this the we doubt that things are as we had understood them before. We see that we've been kind of thrown into a world under the watchful eye of the gods, and that now we kind of doubt the gods in a sense because as we kind of lay out what they're like, they seem really arbitrary, right? So the myth of Poesis sort of reminds us of the mythical narrative root in Greece and Rome, right? That that is a kind of anchoring root alongside the Abrahamic root that most people are familiar with, the mythic narrative root of the Abrahamic religions that most people are familiar with, right? Um, and then what I'm doing in these last few weeks is I'm giving you a third root, which is there. Most people don't know from the last 500 years of interaction of European and American interaction with Asia. A lot of Asian ideas have become another like a third root structure, right? In our thinking, we're just not quite as aware of it as we are of the other two. But we start first at one of the ones that we are a little more aware of, and that's this mythopoeics of Hesiod and Homer. You got the idea the birth of the cosmos is the same as the birth of the gods, and then also you got this notion from Homer that the gods are fickle and arbitrary, and they have this tendency to side with one human while another god sides with another human, and it ends up in these weird, not weird, but it ends up in these really long, drawn out almost play like uh, storylines as though humans are being pushed and pulled around to be entertainment for the gods. Now, what happens, of course, is doubt comes in. So that, that all comes from wonder. There's doubt and thrownness in it, but the real push is the wonder at this vast world and all these people and all this stuff, right? But then you get into the Milesians, and now where you're at is this look for the first principle, right? So the wait a minute, the arche, very close, the first, right? Very close. So we're re-originating, we're rethinking. Oh, and why? Because people like Thales and Anaximander and Anaximenes realized, because of the sort of situation that they lived in around 500, 600 BCE, in the trading city of Miletus, which was both a river port, the Meander River. That's where our word meander comes from. The Meander River, which emptied out at Miletus, and then the seaport, right? That they're right there on the sea too, right? And so they have one of the largest navigable rivers flowing through what's contemporary Turkey, going to this, very navigable sea there, right? And this is Aegean Sea. And so uh they're trading and they're interacting and they're learning from people from all over. And this has to bring doubt. Okay. If you just, if they just put their fingers in their ears, right? And said, "No, I'm not going to listen to the fact that Egyptians have a different story than Phoenicians, and Phoenicians have a different story than Babylonians, and Babylonians have a different story than Persians, and Persians have a different story than Hebrews, and Hebrews have a different story than Romans, and Romans have if I was going to put my my ears, close my ears up and say no, la 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 la. I'm not going to hear all that, or I'm just going to deny it outright and say, "Oh, those people are ignorant," right? But that's not what they did, because they were so inundated with different stories and different ideas that they could, if they forced it, they could make syncretic. But what we wanted to show was the brilliance of this ancient Greek moment, right, was not that they originated any new ideas. That's a whole other issue, but that they saw in their situation that maybe their own beliefs should be reexamined. And when they did that, they realized that the only thing that human beings share is the earth, the sky, the stars, the sun, the moon, the weather. Material reality is the only thing that human beings visually share, right? Now, here already we begin to get into the notion, because it's already there in a sense with mythology. The appearance and the reality don't always look the same, right? So if the appearance is a world of, the world that we see, the reality might be that there's all these gods behind the scenes that are pulling everybody's strings like puppets, right? And then with the Milesians like Thales and Anaximenes and Anaximander and Anaximenes, what we see is the coming to the realization that how the world looks, appears, is not its reality. And if there is something that we can say that would be, something that anyone might be able to agree on if they stopped and really pondered it, it's probably going to be connected to material reality. So the arche, the first, the principle, right? The guiding principle, the guiding instigation of life, right, must be material. And this is a really important concept, for you people who do practice an Abrahamic faith. uh, Jewish, Christian, or Muslim, you should think about how in the history of your religion, you the idea of the soul was not of something immaterial, right? It was actually material. Even Saint Paul in his epistles demonstrates, if you can read the Greek, it demonstrates this notion that there's uh, a material called very fine material, right? That the soul is made out of a very fine material. The suke is made out of a very fine material, and that uh, that fine material can be refined even more into what he called pneuma, right? So it's even there in that. So it's very important to remember that for the ancients, right, despite the fact that we might be able, with 1,000 years of abstractions that we've let leak into Abrahamism, uh, we might think of the soul as immaterial, as having no matter, right? The spirit is having no matter, right? There were no ancient people who thought that the soul or the spirit were immaterial. They thought they were a finer material, right? In fact, I think the notion of ether, right? The notion of the ether, which is the fine material of space that Aristotle kind of puts forward, that idea also sort of makes its way in. It's still matter, it's not immaterial, right? So this idea that the world doesn't at its root reality is not the same necessarily as the way it appears. That's there, but if we're going to say that, then let's begin in that which we share, which is the material, right? And from that material, you get now the idea of, okay, fine, we move into Xenophanes and Heraclitus. Xenophanes and Heraclitus are ways that we now, if we have accepted that the common shared reality is the material reality, or a reality made of matter, then we have to understand how we order and experience that reality. And that's where, Xenophanes' notion of how our ways of narrating the reality are relative to our situation, and how Heraclitus says the how vastly important being an entity like a human being who is in the world of material reality that doesn't necessarily work or act the way it looks like it does, appears like it does, that a good portion of that has to do with the way that we order that reality with our own language, right? So here's a good, I think it's a good example. I mean, y'all may not, maybe y'all have better examples, and I always welcome y'all to get in touch with me. Some of y'all have been really good about letting me know that, your examples and stuff, different sorts of takes on these things. Uh, the idea here would be to say, uh, with Heraclitus, if I were to look at someone who had been kidnapped from West Africa 350 years ago and brought over to the Caribbean, right? And then forced to do labor, right? Uh, we would obviously say that person is a slave, right? Notice that that person is a slave. And that's an interesting thing, because that sort of is like that person becomes the thing that they've been named. What I would ask you to do is, what happens when you say this? That person has been enslaved. That person is enslaved. is in enslavement, right? Now what you're doing is you're describing their situatedness. You're not you're not saying what they are. You're describing how they're in the world right now, right? And this is we can now take it away from that, take it over to something else. That person, right, is a billionaire. Mhm. Is a billionaire, meaning, that's their being, or that person has become wealthy, right? Because they can lose everything. It's not a part, just like a slave can, it's like someone who's enslaved can become liberated. Someone who is wealthy can become poor, right? These are changes in condition. But often the way our language is used, we define a person by the condition they happen to be in, um, rather than disentangling that, right? So this is just one way that language structures our reality, right? Um, okay. And then when you can recognize that you are now in a situation, right, that is relative to vastly different experiences around the world and throughout history, that is conditioned by uh, certain habits of language, right? You can see how the material reality we all share gets can get twisted up, twisted out, and turned into not a shared material reality, but a divided material reality. Divisions of, rich, poor, of powerful, powerless, uh, of male, female, uh, of American, not American. I mean, it's all these little binaries that become really hard dualisms, right? It's not like the ultimate situations or boundaries that I've was getting y'all to think about since the back in the third discussion, right? Those are what I call dyadic. That means like on and off. They can't be uh, understood without the other, right? On is not off, and off is not on. They're a spectrum, right? Right? They're day and night is the same. Okay, they co-imply each other, right? But there is something in these more dualistics, right? They don't necessarily co-imply each other. They only need the other in order to have an opposite, in order to be opposed to something. They don't have the other in order, right? They're not conjoined complexly to the other. They're just there to be in opposition. Okay, that's the strict dualism that can happen sometimes, right? Between the free, the liberated, and the labored, the free and the slave, the enslaved, right? These are these are dualities that exist inside of our relative way of deciding to think about reality. Okay, once we have this realization, okay, that we share material, all humans share material reality, that everyone is coming at that materiality relative to their situation, that inside that relative situation is the relative way that language itself has made relationships, right? Now we can come back to, okay, if I can see the relativity, if I can overcome the habitual beliefs, what's there now? Well, the material reality itself is an expression, as we saw from Parmenides, of to be. To be is the only concept that has no predecessor, right? All of the concepts that we use and we employ, including matter, the world, all of it, right, are preceded by this idea of being, this idea of to be. You must be for any of this stuff to be, right? Matter must be, right? So this becomes a very important push forward in this thinking. Because, for one thing, what it does is it says you really don't understand this vast difference between the appearances and the reality, right? And of course, this is all coming about, about 450 to 500 BCE. This would be after hundreds of years, right, of struggling and thinking of different, not everybody, but of influencers, if you will, struggling through these thoughts, and they've reached a point here in Parmenides and his colleagues uh, of the Eleatic school. They've reached a point where they have recognized that appearances are so controlled by our unexamined ideas, our unexamined belief systems, that we have to radically break free, right? And that radical breaking free is to sort of use doubt to bust through all the beliefs that we hold that are not structured in the ultimate situations, and break through those and realize how much we have been living under illusion, right? And that the only thing that obtains always is to be, right? Because our understanding of matter can change, our understanding of spirit can change, our understanding of the world can change, of nature can change, of blah blah blah, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But every single thing that we hold and that can change, evolve, devolve, wither away, it all must be for us to think it. It all must be thought, right? So this is actually where we take that. So this takes the step of the relativity of our situation in Xenophanes, the importance of naming our situation and understanding how language works in Heraclitus, to then end up with the Eleatics and Parmenides, of recognizing how we are and maybe will always be uh, conditioned to have to radically doubt whatever we've held as the case, so that we can be sure it really is true. Now, what happened, of course, as I've said in a couple of places, is that this led to many of the natural inquirers, the natural historians, the first philosophers, to suddenly have to figure out how they could save the appearances from this kind of radical denial, right, in which thinking and being are the same, right? Uh, but it seems like stuff around us does kind of remain about the same. So what is this weirdness that it's actually there's no difference, uh, there's no separation, there's no motion, there's no movement, this kind of complete radicality. I'm going to argue, I mean, I would argue always that complete radicality of Parmenides was necessary in order to break and fulfill what had already been done by Xenophanes and Heraclitus in this kind of dialectical evolution of Greek thinking. right? Which is one of the roots of Western civilization's thinking about the world. And so, so the way you think is the way the world is, right? To think is to be is to think. Okay. But only through this sort of radical doubt that many of the things you've thought that you've just accepted, you haven't actually thought, you just accepted them. In other words, thinking here is a critical function, right? You have to be ready to make judgments, to critique, to really investigate and challenge all of the stuff that you have accepted but never tested, right? Now, at this point in the semester, we got to the midterm. Boy, a lot of y'all were confused about what we were going to do in the midterm, and that's fine because that was what it was supposed to do. The idea was to really sort of shake up your thinking by making you just look at something you take for granted on a regular basis, right? Water. And there were some really great responses to this. I thought everybody who turned in their work got something out of it from what I could see. I know some folks were very, wrote about the whole thing, and then others, you kind of exploded into this sort of poetry, and then others, you became really scientific. It was interesting because it gave me new insights into who you are. And again, a lot of the things that I ask from y'all is for me to learn from you about that which I can't learn anywhere else, and that is to learn about you, right? And I really got that from your midterms, from the ways that you talked, shared with me what you're doing today, the way that you kind of approached what the hell does Maggie mean by, a day with water, right? But again, doing the water, it brings us back to a shared component of most world mythologies, right? Water, that life arises from water. It brings us to the shared notion in science that life arises from water, right? But it also puts us back into the Milesian place. These people who were on the river, on the sea, trading with other people who went up and down the water and went over across the water, trading with them, not just trading material things, but trading ideas, trading stories, right? uh and so it reminisces that sort of thing, but now it's about the relationship, the relativity of you to water. Your waterification exercise was your day with water. How are you relative to water, right? And then it was to see those of you who actually, it was probably about 20% of you who actually suddenly made this leap over, right, into not just how you are relative to water, but that how you had been thinking, defining, habitually conceptualizing water, right, was something that could be challenged and something that needed to be struggled with, right, worked through, right? Um, and uh, and then of course there were a handful who had a moment of identification with water, right? So that in thinking about water so much, you came to see yourself as fluid. Mm. All the wisdom traditions around the world are constantly attempting to get us to the moment of melting our solidity, melting the hardness of our heart, melting the stiffness of our being in the world, and becoming fluid again, right? And this, of course, is going to be another big thing for when, in these last few weeks, as we do the stuff on non-Western philosophy, Chinese Taoism, and Winnie the Pooh, and the wisdom of insecurity from Alan Watts, all of these things are going to be working together to keep pushing everybody to to becoming more fluid, to becoming more uh, capable of bending with the circumstances, like water, right? Slow and sure, but like water doing that, right? Now, in order to get to that place, we come back, we finish up our some of our work with the ancient Greeks as our originators, and we see now Anaxagoras and Empedocles. Now, Anaxagoras and Empedocles, okay, they're in this trajectory of what my co-authors and I called the gotcha method, or the dialectics of, okay, the person before me, I'm going to engage, and I'm going to get into a kind of dialogue, and then I'm going to gotcha, right? And so when Anaxagoras kind of engages backward with Parmenides and Heraclitus, he comes to the idea, well, if being is thinking and thinking is being, then reality must be mind, nous, right? And there are many people today, including the Christian scientists, a number of Vedantic sects in India, and really just people all over the New Age verse, right? Who believe that we're not material at all. We're just spirit or ideas or mental constructs, right? And the other reason for not, for using the ancients and not doing a lot of stuff with the moderns, is that the modern thinkers, they're already, the way they think and the way it's really kind of a lot in your ideas. But you'll find that every one of the modern thinkers has a counterpart in the ancients, right? So when you go on, and I hope all of you will go on to study more philosophy and to think more about the history of intellectual ideas, you'll see, what these comparisons will be inside the modern constructs, right? But uh, but now with Anaxagoras, again, now we say nous, the world is mind, it's the structure of mind. This is how he tries to get over Parmenides' idea that everything is an illusion, right? And then you have Empedocles, who goes back to a material thing, but it's a material thing that has not one principle, right? Not one arche, but these elementary particles, right? Pre-atomic, earth, air, fire, water, that are the basic building blocks, and the different combinations of those things, right? Material realities. Uh, those can be influenced by thinking, and they can influence thinking. And then finally, um, we come to the atomists, and what the atomists have done is they take the they take the or particle notion of Empedocles. They take the mind idea of Anaxagoras, right? In this sense, that the void, I would argue, is like unto the way the mind is this sort of empty blank space in which all of the ideas bump around on each other. So they take the particle notion from Empedocles with the four elements. The the void idea comes from adopting this notion of mind, where the mind is this infinite space that everything combines and interacts in. And then no this notion from Parmenides, that whatever the arche is, whatever the fundamental is, it must be unchanging, indestructible, indivisible. And there you get the atom. Atom is the Greek word for undivided, indivisible, individual literally comes in from from Latin. It means undivided, right? So with the atomists, we get a theory that attempts to go back, accept the idea of the mythopoeics that we can describe the world, narrate what's going on, accept the idea of the Eleatics that we can that we all share in a kind of material reality, accept the idea of Xenophanes. Excuse me, except let me go back one more time. Scratch what I just said because I know I just made a mistake. Go back to the mythopoeic poets and say that we can narrate our experience and our understanding. Go back to the Milesians. I think I said Eleatics earlier. Go back to the Milesians and say, all what we share is matter. Uh, you know, and there's a person here who we didn't study and who you have a whole huge chapter of at the end of your book, Pythagoras. Now, Pythagoras is actually between the Milesians and Xenophanes, but he's put at the end here for because I usually only teach Pythagoras if I'm teaching an upper level philosophy course that's going to go deeply into Plato and Aristotle. But the idea here is that where the Milesians said we can see that we all share matter, right? Pythagoras said that that matter we share has a certain form and formal arrangement, right? So Pythagoras was really a kind of proto-mathematician who showed that, in a sense, numbers could be used to describe that reality that we share, right? And then from there to Xenophanes, Xenophanes says that that we have to be careful because whatever we do, whether it's a formal or a material narration of reality, right? It's going to be relative to a lot of sociocultural situations and to our own humanity. So we should take care. Now, now Heraclitus comes along. Heraclitus then says, yes, and we're doing this all the time by never really listening to how we describe and narrate the world and the power, the very great deep power that comes from simply over us from society encouraging us to accept things as they're described and defined without questioning them. And so we don't see that, how language has its place, the logos has its place in all of this. And Parmenides, who says if we stop and we really get to it, we see that thinking and being are the same thing, and that our delusion is that we believe that there's some kind of crazy motion going on that we have completely understood and that we have gotten a handle on and that we understand as the way things really are, when in fact we're deluded, we're in an illusion. And if we can let go of that and get back to what's really common, the truly only obtaining thing is to be, and to be is to think, right? And now the Anaxagoras, when he comes along, and Anaxagoras says, okay, well, if to be is to think, then everything is mind. And Empedocles comes along, and Empedocles says, well, if everything that we're talking about in our narrations, right, is a materiality given some kind of formal structure for describing it relative to the situations that we lived in, utilizing the concepts and ideas that we've sort of habitualized ourselves to use, thinking about these things in order to see how they obtain, right, inside of the mind that is itself the origin and the container of everything, with all of these different elemental particles that show the distinct ways of coming together and falling apart and coming up with some things that work and some things that don't work. And now you end up in the atoms taking all of that stuff in some fashion and putting it into this. I'm going to narrate a reality that is a formal mathematical structure of how an infinite amount of atoms in an infinite space could combine in an infinite number of ways to make a world. Bam. And there we are. Okay. Uh, where do we go from here? Now, if you can't see, we've pretty much gotten to a lot of the way that we already think about the world, because since the scientific revolutions of the 17th century, Galileo and Kepler and Newton and all those guys, uh, uh, since that scientific revolution in the European uh, scientific revolution, we have adopted a lot of all these things into the way that we think about the world, based on how the people like Newton used a kind of neo-Pythagorean, you might say, a notion of describing the world with mathematics. Okay, that would be Newtonian mechanics. We can describe the world with mathematics. uh, he even had to invent a new kind of mathematics, calculus, in order to describe the world with mathematics, and accepted as a hypothesis, right? He just accepted as a hypothesis that everything is actually made up of atoms, indestructible particles. Of course, in our contemporary world, we keep refining on this, right? The atom of Newton, which is that utterly undivisible particle, like in Democritus and Leucippus, uh, the atom uh, of Newton is not the atom of us, because our atom is divisible, right? Our atom divides up into three kinds of particles, right? Protons, electrons, and neutrons. And then we even say those are divisible, right? Um, that that they break up into all of these different kinds of quantum particles, tachyons, gluons, muons, bosons, right? And that now there are those who attempt to argue that even those break down into even more, not only into to more particles, but more dimensions, right? In string theory, right? So you have these particular strings that exist in 11 dimensions. It's not really actually worth getting in trying to understand all that. I'm just saying that you see that just by reading up through the atomists, we already have disclosed the majority of the inspiration for a lot of our ideas that many people just take for granted without thinking about it. They just accept what the scientists say. Like when it comes to physics, most people will simply accept what scientists say. They don't understand or get into enough of in enough into quantum mechanics and atomic theory, or even relativity theory, to disagree with physicists, uh, right? Because we are biological entities, because we experience our bodies and our health. I would argue that's one reason many people who actually don't know what they're talking about will more than be happy to disagree with a medical doctor or a medical researcher or a biologist, blah blah blah, etc., right? uh and they will also, like, very few people want to go through the trouble, very few people want to go through the trouble of saying we need to get back to the science of Newton because quantum mechanics is insane. But I can't tell you how many people I've heard in the last 5 years talk about biology, that is, talk about a kind of notions of biology and genetics and everything that has not advanced since 1950, that all thinking about biology since the 1950 that goes beyond the 1950s is unnecessary. And that's mostly because the biology that goes beyond the 1950s utterly and completely challenges their notions of how life happens, how how sexual and gender differentiation happens, because they don't want to think that they just simply disagree with it, or because they have heard one person who is maybe like a ophthalmologist say that vaccines aren't necessary. An ophthalmologist is a specialist of the eye, but he has a medical degree and he says vaccines aren't necessary. And they're like, well, that expert says vaccines aren't necessary. But then there are, 15,000 other experts who are actually people who work in epidemiology and vaccinations. And they're like, no, vaccines are very helpful and in some cases are very necessary. Uh, right. So, where we rarely question physicists because the shit's just too deep in one sense for people to really question, because we live in our bodies, because we have bodies, because we go through, we are biological, we go through health issues and try to be healthy. We will challenge experts in those fields. In fact, we'll have people write laws in state and federal legislatures that have absolutely no understanding of biology or health or medicine or medical protocols or what's going on. They'll write laws to stop experts from being able to do what experts do because it challenges their worldview, right? Um, okay. So here we are. We got all you had to do is just, read from the Mythopoeics up to the Atomists, and you've gotten a good understanding of the root of a lot of our presuppositions about the world. Now, as we move into the non-Western, that's where we will challenge a great deal more of our suppositions, right? You've been given from the beginning. You were asked, push yourself to and challenge yourself to come up with a question that you would really think you might ponder for the next few years, or for the rest of your life even. Because I'll tell you what, the basic kernel that's wrapped that my question wraps around: how do we educate each other? I've been thinking about that nonstop a decade, right? And so when we go into this next section, okay, uh, this is going to be where we now, having centered ourselves, right, in exploring one of the anchoring roots of our world, and knowing that we all have some relationship, even if you're an atheist, even if you're a non-Abrahamic religionist, Hindu, Buddhist, whatever, there's some relation to this Abrahamic thing because of the society we live in as being an operative religion. You have this, and now we're going to explore this third anchoring root of global civilization, which is everything that's not Western, right? And I think the easiest thing to do in the situation like this, of course, is something like this chapter by an old friend of mine, Bob Solomon, and his partner, Catherine Higgins, on non-Western ways of thinkering, non-Western philosophizing, right? And then we'll take that non-Western philosophizing chapter that y'all are working on this week, and you're going to be doing some work, your discussion on for the upcoming Monday. And we'll move from there into a little bit of Chinese Taoism. I think it's better to go with another great civilization, high civilization, if you will, long lasting, long, all the way back to the, ancient times civilization like China, and pick up what's basically still one of the operative ways of thinking among Chinese people. And then for that, what we do is we so that's called Taoism. right? Which is Dao. Dao is the Chinese word for it, the way, right? And and so this will just be a little exploration, but it'll also be side by side with Winnie the Pooh. So if you have never read Winnie the Pooh or watched a Winnie the Pooh movie, I suggest go do that and have some fun with these things because there are, this is just to sort of show you that even in our popular culture, some of these notions from Asia, some of these ideas from our global interactivity over the last 500 years, they've made their ways into the rootedness of our way of thinking. Okay. So we'll challenge what we accept as true. We'll challenge our basic understanding of the world now being situated in our guiding question, having done an exploration of one of our anchoring roots, Greek thinkering, and now just playfully looking at one of another civilization's greatest philosophies, Taoism. And then we'll round it all out with these two chapters, with these two things uh, from Alan Watts called "The Wisdom of Insecurity." Uh, and see here, I think it was "The Wisdom of Insecurity" I gave y'all, wasn't it? Yeah, it's wisdom of insecurity. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't giving you the wrong. But the idea of looking at these things on the wisdom of insecurity is reading these things is, you're going to come back to your guiding questions and your guiding question from the very beginning. You're going to take everything you've kind of thought about and explored in, between week 4 and now. And you're going to also hopefully be thinking about what's going on around you and the socio-political conditions, and you're going to think about where you're going and why you want to go that way, and you're going to utilize this um, to become a little more okay with uncertainty, right? Of feeling insecurity in such a way that you respond to it rather than you react to it, right? And I'm going to put up some more of these things, of these talks uh, that I've already recorded, but I'm editing, and about this idea, right? Because really, these last two things that you'll do, the last 2 weeks you'll do, you're coming back around as you repackage everything you've done and you're contemplating, right? And you're looking back over the course of the semester to see how philosophizing is the willingness to be uncertain and the will to question. And the willingness to be uncertain is when you face insecurity, right? You face insecurity and respond rather than you run away from insecurity in reaction, because that's a big problem that's developed in the United States over the last generation, I would say, maybe 2 generations. And that is there's been a steady fetishism of security, and uh security is equated with certainty, right? If I'm certain, I'm secure. If I'm secure, I'm certain. I don't have anything to worry about. I don't have anything to question, right? And so this fetishism of security has led to a situation in which any kind of insecurity, the smallest little insecurity, right, can cause a reactive running, right? Like, I'm not saying that people have not suffered over the course of the last 5 years from inflation, right? But there are too many economic studies that show that most of this inflation was not what you would call uh, normal inflation that you would get economically. The inflation came entirely from people uh, price gouging, almost entirely from people price gouging, right? So I'm not saying that people didn't suffer from inflation. I'm also not saying inflation didn't happen. I'm saying that most people, in reacting to the fact that inflation happened, right, and to the uncertainties that inflation can cause, right, reacted into a kind of insecurity mindset so that they weren't able to even hear the things that could have helped them, that could have helped them understand the situation better, right? Uh, and I would say that a lot of what drove our election this time on both sides, and I think that each side, if you're convicted, if you have a strong conviction for one side or the other side, I think that the that both sides will disagree with me that what was really going on reactionary uh, was a reactionary uh, insecurity, right? Or an insecure reactionaryism, right? That people became reactionary, insecure uh, about because of higher prices at the gas station, higher prices at the grocery store, higher prices in childcare, higher prices in insurance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, or insecure about the ability to speak freely, or insecure about the ability to make choices for themselves, or insecure. So that both sides will probably disagree with me when I say that both the Republican and the Democratic campaigns were fully and totally reactionary. And they played on people's insecurities while telling them that they would make the world more secure. That's the fetishism of security that I'm talking about. Uh, I'm not I don't usually practice both sidism because uh, I I do think that there can be vast differences, right, in the two, but a lot of that has to do with relative situations, right? But primarily, I think when I look at what happened over the course of the last 2 years, because this damn presidential major election was a 2 year long campaign, that what happened over the last 2 years was just a steady stoking, right, of playing off of uh, reactionary insecurity instead of, right, an insecurity that would ask you to respond to the situation. And I think this is actually one of the issues too for really exploring this uh, as you become adults, right? Is that as you get older, okay, as you have to take responsibility for yourself. And everybody that's a talking head on television or in Washington or Austin is always talking about how you need to be more responsible, how people are so irresponsible. But most people are not irresponsible in the sense of they don't care, or they don't uh they want to, they just make willy-nilly choices. It's not that they're irresponsible, it's that they're reactionary. We've become primarily reactionary. We just react, knee-jerk react, right? um I mean, over the course of my life, I've watched us as we've fetishized security, we've become more reactionary. Uh, and what that ends up meaning is that our politicians, Republican, Democratic, Independent, I don't care, Green, whatever, our politicians have primarily learned to feed us nothing but the things that stoke our insecurity and make us reactionary. So we can't have responsive dialogues with each other, right? Uh, at the local level, you should be able to see through all this. But even there, because we've gotten so far away from each other, come back to what we share. We share this world. We share this time. We share humanity. Okay. Um, We have the ability to experience anxiety and not be reactionary. We have the ability to experience insecurity and not be reactionary. We have the ability to experience loss and not be reactionary, right? But, you know, how does all of that come back around to your guiding question? So this is what I want you to think about. You've just gone through this 2 year long election. You're trying to get your self either onto a new path if you're older, or onto your first great path if this is you coming into college now, and you're attempting to become uh, to to reorient yourself. And uh, a reorientation deserves you to go back, stop, center yourself, open yourself to what's happening, and then attempt to define, describe, determine, delineate that which can be delineated. But you know, right? And maybe you're not in a place of wonder. Maybe you're in a place of doubt. Or maybe you're in a place of thrownness, which could also be called forsakenness. Okay, that's okay. Slow down, stop, just back the hell off, turn off all of your devices, turn off all your devices, TV, computer, tablet, phone. Sit down on your favorite chair or a bed, lay down on a bed, and just let everything go, right? And figure out whether you are marveling at the world and how it's acting, whether you're doubting the basic fundamental structures that you always held to be true, or whether you're right up against one of those ultimate situation margins that Jaspers describes, and you have a kind of existential imperative to really think through what's going on. And let me tell you what, you can do this in conjunction with your spiritual practices. You can do this in conjunction with your scientific practices. You can do this in conjunction with your business practices. Okay. Because philosophizing goes to the source of our humanity. It doesn't differentiate human beings by way of, uh, those who believe or don't believe. It simply says all human beings can think. You can think, find the time to think, and really think. All right. And finally, I'm going to end this thing today. Should get off because I have had y'all for a while here doing this. I'll go back to Paul, to St. Paul. St. Paul says he has a trinity that he talks about, right? Faith, hope, and love, but among these, the greatest is love. But actually, of course, the words in Greek that he uses, if you were to be more careful in your translation, right, would be faith, hope, and charity. The word for love in Greek that he uses there is agape. Agape. Some of you in your churches might have heard of agapic love. Some of you might have run across it. There, to me, there is a I kind of like Heraclitus, right? With this idea of how our words determine our reality. It's interesting to me how many churches refuse to actually use the word charity, and they say something more complicated like agape love. I know coming from me with all of my over complicated verbiage at times, that's kind of ironic, but it's interesting to me that there are churches that refuse to translate that word as it should be translated as charity, and they translate it as agapic love. If you look at a lot of those belief systems, right? There's a big thing that's come into them that really poo-poos charity. The prosperity gospel really poo-poos charity. Right? Got to pull yourself up by your bootstrap, show, because God's chosen you to be successful and blah 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 blah. That's fine. If that's your belief system, okay. But that's actually not what the text does. The text does not say that. And so it's weird when people claim that a text is, divine, and then they choose to use their ability to translate it to hide the truth, right? Faith, hope, and love. You The reason I'm stopping here is what I want over the next 4 weeks, not for you to develop a new religion, not for you to convert, not for you to become atheist, not for you care about any of that stuff. Those are part of the things that keep us separated anyway. That literally is not my concern. My concern is how you, as a human being, can heed the vocation of humanization. And that vocation of heeding your humanization, that is, of becoming fully human and treating other people as full human beings, right? It requires faith in yourself, faith in others, faith in humanity, faith in life, faith in the world. It requires hope for yourself, hope for others, hope for humanity, hope for life, hope for the world. It requires charity to yourself, charity to others, charity to humanity, charity to life, charity to the world. That's what, in my opinion, perennial philosophy, the enduring philosophizing trends across all cultures have always pointed to. Okay, faith, hope, and charity as binding structures that allow you to overcome your own anxieties and fears and reach out to those with whom you can build a life. Okay, so enough of that, and hopefully this gets us all situated for the rest of the semester. And I will be doing my very best to get some of these glitches that have occurred in the bright space because of my ignorance to get all hooked up. All right. Remember, philosophizing is the willingness to be uncertain and the will to question. If this was a face-to-face class, this is how it would end the class. I love each of you for what you have experienced to become the person you were yesterday. I love each of you for what you have brought today. I love each of you for what you will discover about yourself tomorrow. You matter to me. You matter to the people in your life. You matter to the world.